Welcome to our continuing series, Fine Poetry, Poems that Touch Deeper Chords. T.S. Eliot, 1888 to 1965. Introduction from Wikipedia. Thomas Stearns Eliot was a British essayist, publisher, playwright, literary and social critic, and one of the 20th century's major poets. He moved from his native United States to England in 1914 at the age of 25, settling, working, and marrying there. He was eventually naturalized as a British subject in 1927 at the age of 39, renouncing his American citizenship. Eliot attracted widespread attention for his poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which was seen as a masterpiece of the modernist movement. It was followed by some of the best-known poems in the English language, including The Waste Land, The Hollow Men, Ash Wednesday, and 4 quartets. He was also known for his 7 plays, particularly Murder in the Cathedral, 1935. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1948 for his, quote, for his outstanding pioneer contribution to present-day poetry, end quote. Eliot's childhood infatuation with literature can be ascribed to several factors. Firstly, he had to overcome physical limitations as a child. Struggling from a congenital double inguinal hernia, he could not participate in many physical activities, and thus was prevented from socializing with his peers. As he was often isolated, his love for literature developed. Once he learned to read, the young boy immediately became obsessed with books and was absorbed in tales depicting savages, the Wild West, or Mark Twain's thrill-seeking Tom Sawyer. In his memoir of Eliot, his friend Robert Sencott comments that the young Eliot, quote, would often curl up in the window seat behind an enormous book, setting the drug of dreams against the pain of living, end quote. Secondly, Eliot credited his hometown with fueling his literary vision. Quote, "It is self-evident that St. Louis affected me more deeply than any other environment has ever done. I feel that there is something in having passed one's childhood beside the big river, which is incommunicable to those people who have not. I consider myself fortunate to have been born there rather than in Boston or New York or London," end quote. From 1898 to 1905, Eliot attended Smith Academy, where his studies included Latin, ancient Greek, French, and German. He began to write poetry when he was 14, under the influence of Edward Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a translation of the poetry of Omar Khayyam. He said the results were gloomy and despairing, and he destroyed them. Eliot wrote to Conrad Aiken on New Year's Eve, 1914, quote, "I hate university towns and university people, who are the same everywhere, with pregnant wives, sprawling children, many books, and hideous pictures on the walls. Oxford is very pretty, but I don't like to be dead." Escaping Oxford, Eliot spent much of his time in London. This city had a monumental and life-altering effect on Eliot for multiple reasons, the most significant of which was his introduction to the influential American literary figure Ezra Pound. A connection through Aiken resulted in an arranged meeting, and on 22nd September 1914, Eliot paid a visit to Pound's flat. Pound instantly deemed Eliot, quote, "worth watching," and was crucial to Eliot's beginning career as a poet, as he is credited with promoting Eliot through social events and literary gatherings. Thus, according to biographer John Worthen, during his time in England, Eliot, quote, "was seeing as little of Oxford as possible," end quote. He was instead spending long periods of time in London, in the company of Ezra Pound and some of the modern artists whom the war has so far spared. It was Pound who helped most, introducing him everywhere. Eliot died of emphysema at his home in Kensington in London on 4th January 1965 and was cremated at Golders Green Crematorium. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were taken to St. Michael and All Angels Church, East Coker, the village in Somerset from which his Eliot ancestors had emigrated to America. A wall plaque commemorates him with a quotation from his poem, East Coker. "In my beginning is my end. In my end is my beginning." In 1967, on the second anniversary of his death, Eliot was commemorated by the placement of a large stone in the floor of Poets' Corner in London's Westminster Abbey. The stone, cut by designer Reynolds Stone, is inscribed with his life dates, his order of merit, and a quotation from his poem Little Gidding. Quote, "The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living." Cleo McNally Kearns notes in her biography that Eliot was deeply influenced by Indic traditions, notably the Upanishads. From the Sanskrit ending of The Wasteland to What Krishna Meant section of 4 quartets shows how much Indic religions, and more specifically Hinduism, made up his philosophical basis for his thought process. It must also be acknowledged, as Chinmoy Guha showed in his book, Where the Dreams Cross, T.S. Eliot and French Poetry, that he was deeply influenced by French poets, from Baudelaire to Paul Valéry. He himself wrote in his 1940 essay on W.B. Yeats, quote, "The kind of poetry that I needed to teach me the use of my own voice did not exist in English at all. It was only to be found in French."